The year is 1975. Saudi Arabia was cutting its oil supply to the United States, and oil was extremely scarce, inexpensive. No one was buying new cars, and someone had to do something. Luckily, Stanley Meyer exists. He decided he was going to develop a car that would revolutionize the United States and our dependence on oil. He decided that he would create an alternative fuel source. So, Myers developed the hydrogen fuel car. Cars could be powered by water instead of gasoline, and luckily, the human body is made of 70% water, so we would just use human. It all seemed so easy. The fuel cell worked by splitting atoms of water into the basic form, 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen. The hydrogen was burned to create energy, which would be delivered to the car's wheels. The oxygen would just be thrown away into the atmosphere, and it didn't create any harmful emissions. It was revolutionary, but it just seemed too simple. It was amazing. After a few months of developing his fuel engine cell, he built a buggy which was powered by this fuel cell engine. Myers was showing it off and made demonstrations all around the United States. Myers did the impossible, and people were amazed. He did what the Board of Science thought was impossible. He turned tap water into a hydrogen fuel cell and drove his car across the country with 75 liters of water. But the real question is, why have we never heard of Stanley Meyer? Just when it seemed like there was hope, no one was buying cars. Gas was scarce, gas was expensive. That's when the legal issues came. After just a few months that it had been developed, allegations came from lawyers that the hydrogen-powered car was fraudulent and illegitimate. Many said his water fuel cell was nothing revolutionary, and it was simply using conventional electrolysis. Many investors claimed Myers was doing nothing, and the court ordered Myers to repay all investors who were against him. But despite that, some were still defending him. A judge named Roger Hurley defended Meyer, saying, "I would not represent someone who I would consider to be a shyster or a bum." The judge said that Stanley Myers was a nice guy. Not to my surprise, when things were just getting good, when there was hope for the United States and for the working man. On March 21st, 1998, Stanley Myers was mysteriously murdered. He was in a restaurant with his brother, and they were with 2 Belgian investors. Stanley was murdered by poisoning, and his brother, Stephen Meyer, remembered the events of what happened on that fateful evening. His brother said, Stanley took a sip of cranberry juice. Then he grabbed his neck, bolted out of the door, dropped to his knees, and vomited violently. I ran outside and asked him, "What's wrong?" He said, "They poisoned me." That was his dying declaration. After 3 months of investigation, the police concluded that Meyer died of a cerebral aneurysm. But many people who knew Meyer think that he was murdered, as his invention could have massively paved the way for free energy. Other evidence that he was murdered was that Meyer's patents attracted much unwanted attention from governments, mysterious visitors from overseas, and lucrative buyout offers. His brother said that the 2 Belgian investors who were with Stanley on the day of the murder knew something. His brother said, "I told them that Stanley had died, and they never said a word. Absolutely nothing. No condolences, no questions. I never, ever had a trust of those 2 men ever again." The perpetrator, along with his motives behind the murder, were never found. So I'd just like to recap. Just to give an idea, we have people who are homeless, we have people who are struggling to pay their bills, we have people who can't afford a car, we have people who can't afford a meal, we have people who have kids who can't provide for their kids. Yet, we have the government who has so much money and so much power. Now, is it a coincidence that someone like Stanley Meyer created this revolutionary invention? And it was just a couple months of touring across the United States and showcasing what he was so passionate about, and he was going to change the world. And he meets with 2 investors. And this happens? To me, none of this really adds up. Stanley Meyer seemed like a pretty regular guy. He went to high school, just like all of us. He went to college, like most of us. He joined the military. When he was younger, his brother said that they were always building something and they were always creating toys. He was the owner of many different patents, ranging from banking to cardiac monitoring. And from what I've read, it seemed like he was a pretty religious guy. He would credit God for all of his work, and his favorite phrase was "praise the Lord and pass the ammunition." By 1989, the Patent Office gave Stanley special preference due to his innovations, and most of them were usually accepted. They were usually put in action 8 months later after its submission, which was extremely quick, because usually patents take more than a year to be applied. The Patent Office thought his technology and applications were so advanced and ahead of its time. From what I've read, it says that Stanley Meyer has applied more than 200,000 patents. I find it unbelievable that no one knows more about him, because the more I read about him, the fishier it seems. He worked at the Battelle Foundation in Ohio, a firm based on technological research and development for the greater of humanity. He really seemed like he wanted to help people. His patents were developed there. He was involved in a Gemini space program with NASA, and he had significant development in the aerospace technology. Most of his work was solely funded or funded by himself. People say he had the mindset of an entrepreneur. He was recognized by a lot of national and international scientific boards and organizations. He won the award's Inventor of the Year in 1993 and received substantial support from other countries such as Canada, England, and Sweden. Now, why am I giving all this information? My point is that this guy has a pretty good rep. He has awards, he has really good work experience. Why are we not talking more about Stanley Meyer? I've never heard of him before, and it's like he didn't even exist, which I find strange. It would be different if he were just some random dude who developed something and claimed that he's gonna change the world. But Stanley Meyer had some serious rep. Like, he had really good engineering experience. Filing 200,000 patents, and he's meeting with investors, and suddenly that's it. Now, I wonder what really happened. From what I read, it does seem fishy, because the only one who has the account of Stanley dying is his twin brother. He's the only one who has the story. But at the same time, according to the story, they met with Belgian investors. No, the real thing, what happened here, was in the 80s and early 90s, was there something going on between Belgium and America, where the Belgian investors were hired by the Belgian government to assassinate Stanley because they didn't want America to get that far ahead? Or maybe, is this just a cover-up story? Is this something that the United States government covered up? Let's blame it on another country, because maybe America didn't want that technology. They didn't want that in the hands of the people. And they thought it was getting too out of hand, and they didn't believe in Stanley. They didn't think that he would get this far. It makes me really wonder, why is this not in history books? Because in my opinion, it's a pretty cool thing. I mean, water is an extremely prevalent thing, and no one's talking about Stanley. From what I've read, it seems like the fuel cell does live on. So Toyota and Honda are apparently selling fuel cell powered cars. It seems like Meyer's invention did pave the way, but these things that we have now, they're modeled after Meyer's work, and they're not designed exactly the same. In other words, nothing that we have is similar to Meyer's original invention. So the real question is, did the government get their hands on this kind of stuff, and are they overseeing what we can have and what we can't have? So that we can have fuel cells in cars, but we can't have the full potential because that's just too much power in the hands of the people. In the words of James Roby, he was ignored, called a fraud, and died without his small hometown even remembering him with so much as a plaque. Stephen Meyer is the only man on Earth who will ever know the secrets of the hydrogen fuel cell invented by his late brother, Stanley Meyer. Tell me what you think about this. Have you heard of Stanley Meyer before? It makes me wonder why more people aren't talking about these kinds of things. But anyways, if you learned something, like the video, comment what you think, and be sure to subscribe for more videos.